Hello and welcome to a Team Moray Robotics event recap. On April 25th, I competed at Maryland Day 2026. I skipped a bunch of other event recaps to get to this one because it's a different sort of event and I wanted to thank some people while it's still fairly recent. So the backstory is that I competed at Rabid's April Annihilation event on April 11th, and at that event my plastic ant, Outpost 31, performed extremely well, taking second place. On its way to the finals, Outpost fought almost exclusively robots from the Leatherbacks, which is the combat robotics team at the University of Maryland. You might know them from NHRL with robots like Buzzkill, Infrared, and Parallax. You might also know them from trying to choke and beat each other up in the pits at NHRL. Outpost had 6 total fights, and 4 out of those 6 were against Leatherback robots, with one of the other 2 fights being against a copy of a Leatherback robot run by another builder. Since I fought them so much and I was sitting right next to their table, I mentioned that I planned on showing up to Maryland Day, a huge event held at the University of Maryland every year, showcasing tons of the organizations and activities that are a part of the college. Among these organizations is of course the Leatherbacks Combat Robotics team, which I knew usually had some fights going on between team members as a showcase for their club. After mentioning Maryland Day, I was actually invited to compete since my robot proved to be a strong competitor and since I could potentially join the team in the future. This is a great way for them to recruit new members. While I was there, I didn't actually see any of the event other than the combat robots, but there were loads of people and they all seemed to be having a great time. Obviously, it's already passed this year, but you should go to next year's Maryland Day if you can. I'm not actually from Maryland, so I went undercover to draw less attention to myself. The robot fighting took place in the engineering building, and the pit space was very nice and spacious, since it was just the Leatherbacks, making it a smaller event than what I usually go to. Of course, I brought Outpost 31, and for this time, I gave it a new lifter, which is noticeably longer than the classic one. I call it the Thingifier because it should hopefully make robots do the thing, and people get thingified in the movie. The only other change from Rabid was a slightly thinner top plate to make it a little bit more solid. At Rabid, it had stabilizing bars on the back for the first time, which is a big part of why it did so well, because I could quickly get to full speed and chase my opponents down without wheeling. In addition to Outpost, I brought my newest robot, Burt Macklin, or BM, a 2-wheel drive wide vertical spinner that had its debut 2 weeks before at the Rabid event. It did pretty well for its first event, going 2-2 and having some really amazing fights. The idea behind it was basically to take Outpost 31 and turn it into a spinner. This was my first time making more than just a spinner out of Super PLA+, and I had some mixed results with this, but overall I'm satisfied. The name comes from Parks and Rec. This event had a fun format where the majority of the day you got to choose who you wanted to fight, and each fight counted for points. The 8 robots with the most points are put into a single elimination bracket for the last 2 hours. It's kind of like Hive Hysteria, and I absolutely love to have some events like this where you have some freedom with who you can fight. It takes so much stress away from it because you don't have to worry about getting a horrible matchup right away, and you can fight as many times as you want as long as you can rebuild your robot. It's nice having a few events like this where it's even more about just having fun and putting on a good show. The most unique thing here was that certain robots were classified as bosses. This means a robot's one of the top contenders, and you don't lose any points if you lose to it, and it was implemented to make things a bit more fair for the newer club members. If I remember correctly, losing to a non-boss robot costs you 1 point, beating a non-boss robot gives you 2 points, and beating a boss gives you 3. Outpost 31 was designated a boss after its previous dominant showing, and Burt Macklin was a regular bot since it's much newer and not as dialed in. I'll go through the Outpost fights first. Outpost 31's first opponent was Reaver. I never saw the name of this robot in writing, so I think it's Reaver based on the way they were saying it, but it could be Reverb. Reaver is a classic compact undercutter, and I think this was its first ever fight. Unless I'm forgetting something, Outpost 31 has never lost to a horizontal spinner because the bendy TPU forks are great at stopping their weapons. When the fight starts, I do a box rush and Reaver immediately does the thing. I'm not entirely sure if we even hit each other here. This was more of an exhibition for fun sort of event, so I quickly knock Reaver down and push it into the wall. The new longer lifter flips my opponent onto the kick plate to get it stuck again, but I push into it and cause it to get stuck in yet another position, propped up against the side of the arena. I send the lifter straight into Reaver's spinner and finally get them free before lifting Reaver up, costing Outpost 31 a googly eye. Outpost remains in full control of the fight, and you can see the full body lifting ability as I push down on the floor with the lifter. I get a brief pin and then another where Outpost does its trademark aggressive tapping. Outpost gets Reaver up on its forks and slams it weapon first into the wall. There's another very quick pin, and then Outpost 31 uses the new lifter to get the best lift it's ever gotten, causing Reaver to go completely airborne. This was a perfect scenario where the wall helped me get my opponent so high. The new added length then allows Outpost to chuck Reaver straight over its head and into the corner. A lift helps me scoop my opponent up for a pin, and the TPU lifter violently stops Reaver's spinner. I flip Reaver back upright on the release and bounce it around, but that's not good. Reaver got its undercutter stuck deep under the kick plate, and I take this opportunity to taunt my opponent. In an attempt to free Reaver, I got Outpost 31's fork stuck underneath the kick plate as well, and since the robots were both stuck and touching each other, this called for an unstick.
Entanglement, we're running an unstick.
After taking Outpost out from underneath Reaver and resuming the match, I try to free them, but that disc is stuck too far underneath the kick plate. Reaver gets counted out and gives Outpost 31 the win. That was a pretty much flawless fight for Outpost, minus getting stuck in the wall. The forks worked so well against undercutters, and the Thing of Fire lifter made for noticeably better lifts. When upside down, Reaver's spinner was at just the right height to remove the googly eye and cut into the LED holder, but nothing else. I think Reaver ended up winning Best New Robot by the end of the event after it beat Ultraviolet. Outpost's next opponent was Jeff the Land Shark, a grabber lifter robot kind of like Claw Viper. I fought him at an earlier macro event with a different robot, and neither of us were working as intended, so I was hoping for a good fair fight this time. Jeff made some really good looking improvements, mainly a reliable lifter, wide chassis, and some very long forks that made me pretty nervous. Grabber lifters are some of my favorite weapon types, and I absolutely love Jeff the Land Shark. For a while now, I stopped running the absurd forks on Outpost, which was working great, but I broke out the new version of them for this fight to hopefully outreach Jeff. If I didn't clearly have a reach advantage after the first bit of the fight, I wanted to try and outdrive the Land Shark. When the fight starts, we run into each other, and a missed lift from Jeff allows me to push him across the box and get a pin, complete with some aggressive tapping. Jeff catches Outpost in the corner and then picks it up by the fork, suplexing the whole robot. However, I use the flexibility of the TPU forks to pick him up by driving backwards. I completely reverse the pin and celebrate by slapping him like crazy. And some people complain that control bots aren't entertaining. After pushing Jeff, I get one of the forks stuck in the kick plate, but I just barely get out in time to face my opponent and avoid getting pinned. We try to outfork each other, and a driving mistake lets Jeff lift up Outpost 31. My stabilizing bar gets stuck in his drive system, which lets him maintain control and get a full-on suplex, which separates us. Jeff's so wide that he hits the wall when he tried to turn around, which lets Outpost scoop him up for a short pin. It's hard to take full control over him because of those long forks, but getting to the side of them is the way to go. Outpost 31 gets a full 10-second pin this time and pushes the lifter into the floor to flop Jeff around. Jeff gets a little bit of control and then completely pins Outpost 31 against the wall for the full 10 seconds. As soon as he releases, I push him to the other side of the box and get another pin myself. The furious slapping actually does help because I was able to pull Jeff farther on top of Outpost 31. The two lifters cause some wacky stuff to happen, and the final 10 seconds of the fight see Outpost 31 getting one last stretch of control as the fight goes to the judges. Outpost 31 won the decision, and that was a very fun fight. It was hard to consistently maintain control against something with forks that long, and the two lifters made for a few very interesting exchanges where the robots were able to get out of pins and make things hard for the other robot. The next fight was against Cyclops, an undercutter very similar to Reaver, but with a thicker blade. I thought this would probably be a lot like the Reaver fight. When the fight starts, I take it slow and start to get some control in. Pushing with the lifter gets Cyclops stuck on the kick plate, but a lift gets it free. Cyclops hits the wall and gets flipped back upright. I get a pin and try to absolutely destroy my opponent, as you can see. The spinner gets stopped against the wall and Outpost gets another pin, ending with a nice lift on the release. I get another lift in and slam the robot into the wall, but I make a mistake driving into it. Fortunately, I'm able to wiggle myself free and drive straight underneath Cyclops. Cyclops gets a little hit, but Outpost 31 picks it up again and flips it over. A lift in the corner causes one of Cyclops' wheels to fall off. I'm pretty sure all the aggressive tapping caused that to happen. Using my opponent's weapon against it, I push Cyclops into the wall and throw it backwards. Then I do the same sort of thing a second time. It seems like with only one wheel, Cyclops' spinner was dragging the floor and unable to spin. Outpost comes in for maybe the most aggressive tapping yet.
Oh, that's a pin! Oh, that's gruesome! Oh, that's even worse!
Outpost does its victory dance, which the crowd seemed to enjoy, and I bring my opponent's wheel over to the door so someone wouldn't have to reach all the way in there and get it out. It's the perfect size to fit in between my forks. Well, that was another nearly perfect fight for Outpost 31. I'm so happy with how effective a lifter can be as a weapon. I mean, it actually got a knockout by using its weapon. Now at 3-0 with 3 points, it was safe to assume that Outpost 31 was going to make the bracket, but my next fight was almost certainly going to be the toughest one yet. My first 3 opponents were competently built robots, and Jeff the Landshark is a very tough opponent, but the other 2 spinners were newer builders, and I was kind of surprised they wanted to fight Outpost so early on. I expected to get really difficult opponents right away since I was a boss robot, so this would be my first really good test. I swear I wasn't like picking on the newer robots or anything, it just happened to work out that way. My next fight was against Aku, who spells its name differently depending on which registration website you're on. Aku is a fast 4-wheel drive egg beater, or Beta Ba, built by Liam King of Buzzkill. We fought a few months ago, but I didn't have the stabilizers on the back then, and I was doing alright until a wheel came off. This had potential to be a very back and forth fight. When the fight starts, I make a terrible driving mistake and get thrown into the air. However, I quickly get even with Aku and slam him into the wall. His forks get caught on either side of Outpost chassis, allowing me to push him into the wall backwards. He gets a nice double hit, but the anti-drum forks work perfectly and don't let him get any bite. They work again, but Aku gets a few quick hits off. Then he lands a constant string of hits, giving me absolutely no space to regroup and do what I need to do. One of these hits pulled a screw loose on the backside, so the top plate was coming off in one spot. Once I get some space, it makes things harder for Aku, but I can't get a pin because his forks kept feeding my forks into his egg beater. Outpost gets flipped again and then gets thrown through the air because I kept the lifter too far up and he was able to hit it. The bounciness of Aku lets him escape Outpost's forks, but with the lifter up, the forks did a better job of stopping him. Here I come in from the side to control him, but just can't maintain a pin. Keeping the lifter up seems like the right move because I'm able to stop Aku from flipping me every time. I do take a hit here, but he rides far up my forks where I can push him. However, Aku bites into a fork and throws Outpost onto the kick plate. I make the mistake of putting the lifter farther down and pay the price. All Aku needs is one good hit, and then he just keeps hitting you before you have time to get your bearings and get properly squared up. Going head to head leads to Outpost 31 preventing Aku from getting a hit, while they make this sound. I get under Aku from the side and finally get a lift, which unfortunately doesn't quite flip him. Aku catches a wheel guard and starts its next series of big hits in the corner. When he backs into Outpost, his egg beater spins down on the left side fork and ingests it, stopping his weapon. When we separate, his weapon doesn't spin up immediately, which gave me hope that it had died. When Aku goes to self-right against the wall, this happens. Oh. He lands on top of Outpost 31 and starts to spin the egg beater as I lift him up, and then when he flips over, he sucks a fork into the weapon again. The robots fall down onto the wall with Aku's wheels not touching anything, and Outpost stabilizing bars helping to prop us up. This is probably the strangest and coolest pin I've ever gotten. When it's time to release, Outpost wheels are off the floor due to the 2 stabilizers, so I have to push off the wall with the lifter. It takes a bit, but Aku's weapon spins back up and delivers a hit. The forks give him some trouble a few times, and I get a slight lift right before getting hit again. A fork gets stuck in the wall and gives Aku a free shot. There are 2 more hits before the fight goes to the judges. Obviously, Aku won that, but it wasn't a bad showing for Outpost 31. Strangely enough, I feel like I got out-forked here. Aku's forks weren't longer than mine, but they were long enough where they stopped Outpost from fully scooping him up. He could also kind of turn into the sides of my forks and get enough engagement to flip me that way. Also, egg beaters tend to get more bite on TPU than drums do, so this was just not an ideal design matchup. I think I would run the long forks if I fight him again. I didn't even notice until after the fight, but Aku severely bent one of the drive motor shafts. It still spun and drove well enough for me not to notice, but I swapped it out just to be safe. If I only knew. Other than that, I had some Aku rubbed off on the forks, the googly eye was torn up, and the center screw on the back was pulling out. All things considered, Outpost proved to be very durable once again. My next fight was against Crabulon the Almighty, spelled with all caps. He's a wide vertical spinner and has a history of not working correctly, but if he does work, he does seem like a very formidable opponent. We fight at almost every event we both go to, but we've never had a fight where both robots are at 100% going into it. Sadly, this seemed to be the case this time as well, because half of Outpost's drive was intermittent when I put it in the arena. Since it was intermittent and not completely dysfunctional, and since this was just a fun exhibition sort of event, I decided to just fight like this. I also chose not to put the long forks on like I usually would for this fight because I didn't want there to be a lull in the action for the audience. Even though Outpost 31 wasn't going into this one in the best shape, I thought I might be able to combat this with my secret anti-Crabulon weapon, the Old Bay hat. When the fight starts, the fight doesn't start because Crabulon isn't in his corner.
Oh, I actually was not in my corner. That's my bad.
When the fight actually starts, Outpost 31 has half drive and Crabulon gets stuck in the wall. He gets free and sends Outpost 31 skyward, but ends up fixing my drive. We start having a battle of the forks, and after trying to get the upper hand, I slam Crabulon's weapon into the wall and flip it over. Outpost gets a pin. I don't know what else to say about this, it's just a pin. I push the crab around and take 2 small hits. After gyroing around, Crabulon lands perfectly on top of Outpost 31 in a way that gets him stuck up there. I take him into the wall for some slapping and get popped back before re-engaging the pin. Crabulon gets under Outpost from the side where half the drive seems to die again and I get juggled around against the wall. He juggles pretty well, maybe he's a clown crab. Crabulon does a great job at keeping the pressure on, staying on top of Outpost. With half drive, it's hard to keep up, and pinning is much less of an option without the ability to drive straight. By now, a corner of the top plate was coming off and letting the one functional motor push out of the robot, pretty much disabling the drive completely. Someone says finish his haircut. Fortunately for me, being stuck with my back to the wall makes it hard for Crabulon to hit me because of the forks. With no drivability, I'm left with no choice but to walk with the lifter.
It's a true walker! He can weigh twice as much!
There's this one really cool hit where I do a bunch of flips, and the last bit of the fight is just Outpost 31 avoiding a knockout by crawling around.
Transmitter down, that's a match.
Dude, being able to drive makes this so much easier.
So that wasn't ideal. Crabulon the Almighty won that, which is clearly the right call. You saw the top plate have a screw pull out again, so maybe it's time for plastites. The lifter had a bit of material removed, but nothing too bad. There was some crab on the back from where he pinched me. The sad thing is, this is one of the dumbest ways I've ever lost a fight. After Aku bent that motor shaft, I swapped to a different motor to be safe, but I somehow missed the gigantic purple U written on one side of the motor I grabbed to swap it with. This U stands for usable, which I wrote on there after I had issues with it being intermittent in the past. And Outpost 31 was doing pretty well before that motor went down, so if I had just seen the U, I might have won that. We're 2-2 with each other now, and I swear we will have a fight where both robots function properly. Even if we're fighting different robots, I'll take anything at this point. This was my last fight before the event switched over to the backgrounds? What? This was my last fight before the event switched over to the tournament rounds, and Outpost's initial 3-0 run meant it was tied for the 4th seed with Jeff the Landshark. Also, the loss to Aku didn't cost me any points since it was a boss robot, but the Crabulon fight did make me lose one. They decided to do a top 16 bracket instead of the originally planned top 8, which was not ideal for me because I went from having to fight Jeff the Landshark again to having to fight Obese. Obese is a Smee-style robot, which doesn't look too crazy from this picture until you see that it printed these things. I think they printed them the night before the event or something. This is one of the worst possible matchups I could have gotten because I think besides maybe Jeff the Landshark, Obese was the only robot there to outreach Outpost 31. I was hopeful though because Obese was a new robot and only had one fight before this in which it lost after breaking down. My strategy was to put the long forks on and try to get to the back or sides, or maybe try turning into the side of their forks. Oh, and they had a lifter on one of the chassis. When the fight starts, miraculously, I get a pin. This was achieved through coming at the forks from the side, and was certainly encouraging. People were confused as to whether or not this was even a pin because of how far apart the robots seemed. Obese reverses the pin, but doesn't hold it for very long at all. Outpost gets a decisive pin from the side, and you can see already what kind of fight this is going to be. It was hard to use the lifter effectively against something so airy though. So far, it was easier to get to the chassis and get pins than I thought it would be, but Obese uses its superior reach to completely engulf Outpost 31. I'm able to drive up the front of my opponent and use the lifter to escape the pin, which is another thing a lifter is good for. Suddenly, Outpost 31 maybe experiences drive problems on the left side, but it starts working again quickly enough for it not to be an issue. I think Outpost is so far up the forks here that it stays on them when Obese backs up. The reactions to all the pins are so funny.
That's a pin! That's a pin!
I'm able to reach one of the smaller forks to lift both robots up for a little bit. There are quite a few confusing pins where it isn't really clear if it truly counts as a pin or not, until Obese gets this one, which is obviously a full-on pin. He gets stuck in the wall and has trouble releasing, but Outpost 31's right side of drive dies for the second fight in a row. I don't know the exact moment it died, but I think it was preventing me from controlling him anymore. I guess I won this exchange here, but I don't know exactly what was happening. The forks stop Obese for a little bit, but he pushes Outpost into the wall for another pin. This is where this riveting fight ends. Nobody really knew what to make of this one. Obese won this fight, which I do think was the correct decision because I lost a drive side and he started completely dominating the whole later part of the fight because of this. This is another annoying loss because I don't even know what went wrong with the drive side. I haven't replaced the motor yet or looked for a different problem, so I can't say what caused this. My best guess is that this was just an old motor and it ended up burning out. Before the drive problems, I was doing pretty well, so that makes it even more disappointing, knowing that I probably would have done better if I had just had a quality motor in there. So now Outpost 31 was out early in the round of 16. Overall, definitely not a bad showing with 3 great wins and a very satisfying loss to Aku, but the last 2 fights were major disappointments because of random issues. I would have loved to have seen what Outpost could have done without the drive issues. I don't even need to improve anything on the robot, I just need to make sure that I put functional motors in it. And I did want to make a few changes after how it first performed, but I decided to wait on that and just bring the same version as Outpost is my main robot anyway. I brought Burt Macklin with more of the throw it in a fight and see what happens kind of thought process. Burt was in the very first fight of the entire day against Aku. I didn't expect to win this, but it would be a great test of durability. Burt did, however, do very well against a version of Aku, Flurry, at Rabid, but it lost in the end. When the fight starts, the first hit of the day ends up being a roof shot as Burt Macklin wheelies into Aku's spinner. He hits my forks from the side to flip me and does it a second time. The forks get under him and help me land some tiny hits. The wheeling leads to a roof shot again, but this time Burt lands right on Aku's egg beater. This exchange tore up some of the Super PLA Plus underside, which was something I knew might happen after Rabid. This makes it basically impossible to do anything because the forks don't touch the floor right anymore, and Burt wheelies almost every time I try to drive forward because a piece of the underside was sticking out at a weird angle. Aku knocks Burt Macklin around for the whole rest of the fight until this hit here that leaves me immobile. Without any functionality, Burt Macklin gets counted out and loses the fight. That wasn't too surprising. The bottom was torn up and you can clearly see why this made it hard to drive. It actually cracked all the way through. The other side also had a dent and cracks in it, but it wasn't nearly as much of a problem. And then a few other parts of the bottom had damage, but not enough to affect anything. Whatever it was that caused the whole robot to die was not immediately clear, but I suspected it was a wire coming loose from one of the terminal blocks. Burt's second fight was against Cyclops. This fight took place before I fought Cyclops with Outpost. Burt already proved to be decently well set up to fight undercutters, so I felt like this was in my favor. When the fight starts, Cyclops stops its spinning weapon by running into the wall, and Burt Macklin charges in. I grinded the backside a little and then flip Cyclops with some small hits. My spinner struggles to properly engage until Cyclops backs its wheel into Burt's spinner, where I get a nice hit. The wheeling is clearly an issue when I miss a perfect hit on the backside because the robot tipped backward. So far, the wheels have proven to be the best place to get a hit, as I get a decent amount of engagement on them 2 more times. I think the forks are too flat to feed the tall chassis of Cyclops into Burt's spinner because getting to the back doesn't do much of anything. I wanted to go weapon on weapon while Cyclops was upside down because I thought my spinner would catch the underside of their weapon, but I didn't line this up the best because Cyclops connects with the side of my spinner or the upright. Then something I never thought I'd see in Plastic Ants happens when a few sparks fly off of Burt Macklin's weapon motor. Cyclops drives over the side of Burt where my spinner grinds at the top plate, but Burt suddenly stops moving in this position. I knew the robot stopped working completely, but since Cyclops was stuck on top of Burt, the 2 robots got an unstick. When the fight resumes, Burt Macklin is still dead even after a hit from Cyclops, and I get counted out. That fight wasn't the best, and I think I want to design some kind of wedge for horizontals now so I can get more engagement. The fight might not have been the most exciting, but the damage was surprisingly bad. The spinner got hit from the side, which pushed it into the motor and put it at an angle. This caused the plastic on the side of the spinner to be warped into a cone shape, and the whole thing got stuck to the motor. The sparks happened because the can got pushed into the metal mounting part on the motor and caused the whole thing to seize up. The weapon assembly replacement wasn't really that hard, but I couldn't figure out why the whole robot stopped working. The first loss probably wasn't caused by a wire coming out of a terminal block, because it died again in this fight and the terminal blocks were not the problem. Eventually, I figured out that the receiver had stopped working for some reason. By the time I swapped it out, there weren't any robots left to fight, and the qualifying fights ended with Burt Macklin at -1 point, I guess. But remember, I said they expanded the bracket to a top 16. There weren't 16 functional robots left, so Burt Macklin made it in, even with negative points. I don't know how many robots there were, but it couldn't have been that many more than 16. Burt Macklin's first round fight was against Jeff the Land Shark, ranked 4th along with Outpost 31. I didn't think this was a great matchup because he very clearly outreached me, and it would be hard to outdrive him with the wheeling being such an issue. My strategy was to avoid going head-on in order to avoid the forks, but this would be difficult without wheelie bars. Once I got a hit, I wanted to keep the pressure on as much as possible while he couldn't use his forks. I was not expecting to win this, but I thought I had a chance, since I probably wouldn't take any damage. When the fight starts, Jeff immediately shows off his reach advantage and Burt Macklin flips itself. I ride up the forks again and then straight up his face to remove both googly eyes at once. Even though he's blinded now, Jeff remains in control and tries to get a suplex. I make a driving mistake in the corner, which Jeff takes full advantage of, holding Burt Macklin by pressing down on the fork with its lifter. Turning into the side of Jeff's forks lets me get under him and land a hit to the underbelly. As he tries to self-right, I land a follow-up hit, but missed 2 more due to wheelies. His drive was significantly impaired now, so I try to be cautious and get to the back or sides without tipping backwards. It does not work as Burt tips backwards when it tries to engage. Now that I was already close to his side, I drive forward slower and pop him up. Burt remains in control with more hits to the underside, and Jeff remains on the forks. After pushing him into the wall and starting to grind with the spinner, Jeff attempts to escape using his lifter, but it allows Burt Macklin to get better bite on his back plate and tear into it. Jeff's forks still prove to be a problem and do a good job of preventing Burt from delivering its spinner. I'm able to push my opponent into the wall, but his forks still make it hard to land any hits. Running into the forks from an angle works out because I get underneath them and continue chipping away at the bottom of Jeff the Land Shark. Burt gets high-centered on the front end of Jeff, and he almost gets a suplex, but doesn't quite have enough chassis to grab.
Yes, yes!
Burt Macklin gets a push and then backs away from a pin just in time to avoid a lift. Jeff lifts at the wrong time, bringing the lifting arm into Burt Macklin's spinner. This allows me to get another flurry of hits, popping Jeff up into the air and slamming it against the wall. Jeff keeps the fight relatively close with more control, but it doesn't take long for Burt Macklin to come in from the side and tear off a piece of tape. Jeff gets stuck on top of Burt for an interesting mid-arena pin. This charge did not go as I had hoped and causes Burt to get corralled into the corner for a pin. Jeff's lift frees Burt and he remains in control, leading to him flipping me and getting the first full suplex of the fight.
Yes, 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 yes!
Burt lands another small hit and chases Jeff around before getting stopped by the floor and flipping itself. Jeff perfectly scoops up Burt Macklin to deliver one of the coolest moves of the event. He grabs Burt's spinner and fearlessly suplexes my robot by the weapon, causing Burt to flip through the air.
Good lift.
Jeff completely high centers Burt Macklin, but my spinner has a lot of torque and spinning it up and down lets the wheels touch the floor and I get free. Jeff stays on top of me though, and both robots try to win the ground game for a bit. The front ends prevent either one of us from fully getting the upper hand until Jeff brings his lifter into Burt's weapon. The ability to wheelie proves to be somewhat useful just this one time when Burt acts like a full body lifter during this pin. I fail to get one final hit before the fight goes to the judges. That was a fantastic fight and a pretty close one too. Someone even said I think that's a draw when it ended, which isn't possible but shows how close it was. The judges gave it to Burt Macklin, giving me a surprise upset and meaning it wouldn't go home winless. The slight damage and drive trouble on Jeff probably pushed it over the edge. I probably would have done even better if I had wheelie bars, but I absolutely loved that fight because it was back and forth and showed off Burt's weapon. Burt did a bit of damage grinding at the TPU on the back without tearing it up too much, rubbing some Burt black on the bottom, and most noticeably cracking and warping the back plate. The builder, Austin, let me keep this part and it's a really cool little trophy. Speaking of trophies, some kid was playing with the trophies during this fight, smacking them into each other. I think Austin said there was some kind of transmitter or connection issue causing Jeff to drive weirdly. Jeff didn't do this, but after the fight I noticed this bit of damage on Burt, which had to either be from Aku or Cyclops. That was a nice surprise and gave me the opportunity to get revenge in the round of 8. That's right, now I had to fight Outpost after it beat Outpost 31. Apparently Burt was supposed to fight Outpost in the first round, but they were nice enough to modify the bracket, so that didn't happen. Of course, I was severely outreached, but I didn't feel too bad about this matchup. The forks are fairly thin, and after Outpost was able to get under them from the side, I thought Burt could do the same and maybe tear them up. Coming from an angle worked well against Jeff the Landshark's TPU forks, which also gave me the hope that this strategy might work. Also, Obese had a bunch of wires taped on the back, so obviously I wanted to hit those.
One corner, he's here to parks and wreck his opponent. It's Burt Macklin. The other corner, he's big, he's fat, he's the obese.
When the fight starts, Burt Macklin doesn't even move before Obese pins me. The forks are so stupidly long that I can drive around on them, but I'm still trapped in the corner. Burt drives over the forks like speed bumps, and it's almost bouncy enough to escape. Burt rides up Obese's front end and flips itself onto its weapon. This was all counted as the same pin because he was kinda backing up, but now he had to fully release. His forks completely keep Burt Macklin from doing anything, but luckily I'm able to back off of them. You can see how quickly I go for it when I see an opportunity to hit the side of the forks, but I wheelie too much. Obese uses its long lifter for a moment, and Burt Macklin does a bunch of flips, ramping up his face. Twice. 3 times. Obese releases, and so far I haven't been able to do anything. I ride way up the forks, which allows Obese to lift Burt up and keep it there for a pin. He slams Burt Macklin into the wall, and does it again, but gets his lifter stuck under the kick plate. He seems very stuck, and I position Burt in a good place for if he gets unstuck, but I leave him to be counted out because he's so hard to fight. Moving the lifter frees him, and unfortunately he turns in time to pin Burt Macklin. I just wasn't fast enough to react to him getting free. Shockingly, he pins me yet again, but Burt Macklin makes contact with his lifter and rips the whole thing off.
Oh, he broke it! No!
Obese gets stuck in the wall, but I'm fast enough to get around to the back. I don't get a lot of bite, but Burt's spinner starts grinding away at all the tape and wires on the back of Obese. I'm able to remain behind him for a while, but I can't really get a good hit until I push him into the wall and rip up a bunch of the wires. You can see they're exposed now. Burt turns to grinding one of the chassis, which rubs black plastic on it. Look, the servo horn's still moving. A good solid hit splits open the chassis, which seemed to be the functional one, and leaves Obese completely immobile. Burt Macklin shows off its taunting abilities as Obese is counted out and sends Burt to the semi-final. I was worried for most of that fight, but man, that was a satisfying ending. I think the hit to the backside took out the right side of drive, and then the hit to the chassis killed the other one. This fight would have been a little easier if the wheelies hadn't been a problem, because I could have charged in quicker without worrying about tipping. The builders of Obese gave me the long lifter arm, which they said was mounted very loosely onto the servo. You can see they melted TPU onto the PLA to increase the thickness of the mounting part. This is why it came off so easily. Now, one fight away from the finals, Burt Macklin had to fight Aku again. I figured this was probably the end of Burt Macklin. The reason it died in the previous match was probably a bad receiver, but I still thought Aku would dominate Burt and damage its underside. I repaired the previous damage from Aku with a soldering iron, and I thought it might not hold up. When the fight starts, Aku actually gets stopped by Burt's forks, and I push him into the wall. The forks keep working really well until Aku hits one and flips Burt Macklin. Then he sends it flying like our first fight, but Burt gets back into control of the fight and lands a hit right on Aku's backside.
Oh, good hit on the butt from Burt Macklin.
We're having a good driving match as I keep my forks pointed in the right direction while Liam quickly maneuvers around. Burt unwheelies just in time to throw Aku over top of it. I don't really know who won this exchange, but Aku definitely won that one. However, Burt Macklin scores a hit on its back right wheel. This last hit killed his right side of drive and seriously surprised both me and Mitchell.
Aku losing a drive side!
Aku doesn't let this stop him as he smacks Burt Macklin into the air. I briefly oversteer into his egg beater, but then Burt nibbles at his front wheel and delivers a great hit when the bots go weapon on weapon with Aku in the air. I play things a little slow, focusing on point and shoot driving, and it pays off pretty well when I juggle Aku around. Aku pops Burt onto its weapon, but Burt quickly returns the favor. Burt gets bounced around more and then keeps Aku in the corner to hit it around with its spinner. Aku gets a double shot, throwing Burt up and hitting it when it comes back down. I come in from the side and pin my opponent while using the spinner to grind away at Aku's TPU armor. Burt hits Aku away on the release and then rushes over for a short pin against the wall. Aku catches a fork and hits Burt Macklin. The right fork in particular was starting to get bent up, allowing Aku to win more exchanges. Burt almost gets a pin, which causes Aku to gyro itself into the wall. The bent up fork hinders Burt more, and you can see how it gets fed up into Aku's spinner easier than before. The fight ends with one last hit from Aku and a wire beginning to poke out of Burt Macklin. It was another close fight, but the judges gave Burt Macklin the win and sent it into the grand final. I was very surprised with how that went because Aku is a top-notch competitor. Even before the drive side went down, Burt was keeping the fight pretty even and the forks worked great. I think Liam said the drive troubles came from some kind of motor failure. The underside took a bit of damage, but nothing like our first fight. There was also a bit of wood stuck in the layers near the front. Burt Macklin shockingly made it to the grand final where it had to fight Redemption, built by the reigning Beetleweight champion of NHRL, Alex Wang. Redemption is a great drum spinner that sometimes uses a dual drum setup, but had its more traditional single weapon on for this fight. Redemption absolutely dominated Burt at Rabid, but I had a drive motor mount that was already damaged, so I wasn't going into that one at 100%. I was favoring Redemption, but my forks should work well against his drum, and after beating Aku, I wasn't counting Burt Macklin out. It felt right fighting a graduated leatherback and a Golden Brett winner in the final.
Alright, this is the grand finals. We've got some random guy we recruited to fight, and a former UMD student. Who will win? The Burt Macklin driver says this is his first time setting foot at UMD.
When the fight starts, Redemption wins the first exchange and then follows this up with little hits. Burt Macklin sends Redemption bouncing across the arena with a solid hit, but then Redemption tears a weapon motor wire out of Burt. Redemption rides up my forks and smacks Burt into the wall from hitting its weapon. He remains in full control of the fight until a small weapon-to-weapon exchange. Redemption is way more aggressive, but it gets flipped over and Burt tries to catch it. Redemption avoids my attacks and delivers some of its own. Another weapon-on-weapon hit leaves Burt in a better position, but I fail to capitalize. Redemption lands another hit and then eviscerates the kick plate or something. Burt causes Redemption to do a flip, but then he hits my wheel guard. Redemption chains a whole bunch of hits, giving Burt Macklin no space and showing off Alex's highly aggressive driving. Finally, I get a little bit of space, but Burt gets punted across the arena and hit hard on the bottom. Redemption continues his onslaught, landing hit after hit, and wasting no time to run in and smack Burt Macklin again and again. I seriously had no time to regroup whatsoever because Redemption just didn't hold back at all. The forks getting bent up certainly didn't help me here. I don't need Redemption to get any hits because I proved that I can actually do it myself. It's been a while since Burt Macklin was able to get a single hit, but it finally happens again before Redemption goes right back to kicking Burt butt. In the final 10 seconds, Burt gets another hit in, but ends the battle with two bent forks while getting thrown all around by Redemption.
Alright, after much deliberating for the last 2 seconds, Redemption has won.
And I almost won a few $1,000s. I can't even begin to be disappointed with that fight because I didn't expect Burt Macklin to go nearly this far after how it started the day. Also, it survived against a great robot and put on a great show. The weapon motor wire was hanging out of the back for almost the whole fight and the motor still works. Before the fight, Mitchell was surprised that I didn't have a center screw for the back of the top plate. I see why. The right fork was peeling apart and should probably be retired now. The underside was beaten up badly in the center and there was some Redemption stuck in the screws. Somehow the switch exploded, but clearly it didn't really matter because the robot was still working and the switch functioned as normal. That was a crazy run for Burt Macklin. Not only did it come back from an 0-2 qualifying round to beat really good opponents, but this was only its second event, making it my most quickly successful robot. I definitely want to make some changes, mainly anti-wheelie bars and forks with better downforce. I'll probably also switch to a TPU unibody chassis and plastites. I'm very happy with the overall design of the robot and it will definitely be back. Honestly, I might be happier with the second place trophy. It's a muscular flexing body with an L for a head that says Scram on it, which is the name of the event. It also includes such phrases as Leatherbacks, number 2, you almost did it, loser of all time, and placeholder text. It's also squishy. Liam said he tries to make the trophies as stupid as possible, and I think he did an excellent job. At the end, we took a picture with all the robots and builders together. When they took the picture with just the Leatherbacks in it, they almost threw Outpost 31 across the room. That makes this the second or maybe even third time someone tried to throw Outpost across the room in an event. I had an amazing time at UMD with some really interesting, memorable fights. It was a fun change of pace with the format and the more casual feeling. Of course, I want to thank the Leatherbacks so much for inviting me. I never expected to have this opportunity. Maybe I'll consider not running the absurd forks when I fight them in the future. Thank you, Leatherbacks, and thank you for watching this very long event recap.